So, in the last part, I told you how the conversations began, how this man seemed warm, accomplished, charming, intelligent, spiritual, and easy to talk to. I also told you about the one thing that kept bothering me. No matter where our conversation started, somehow they kept circling back to schmicks. Not just schmicks as intimacy, schmicks as leverage. Schmicks as something that could keep a woman attached to a man even when the relationship itself was bad. And while all of that was happening, there was another shift beginning. The questions started changing. They became more specific, more practical. And looking back now, some of those questions feel very different to me than they did in the moment. At first, it sounded casual. He would ask, "What's your job title again?" Then something like, "You must get good benefits there, like health benefits, dental care, pension," things like that. And he would say it lightly, almost conversationally, nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to and say, "There. That's the problem." Because there is a difference between someone being interested in what you do and someone seeming interested in what your position gives you access to. And I remember feeling as though he wasn't simply trying to understand my work. It felt like he was weighing capacity, my capacity, what I earned, what came with my job, what kind of stability I had, what kind of infrastructure existed around my life. Now, did I accuse him of that? No. I didn't, because remember, I was still getting to know this person. I didn't want to create motives where there might not be any. So I listened. I answered what I wanted to answer, and I kept observing. Then one day, during one of our conversations, I said something very ordinary. I said, "When are you coming over again? I'd like to see you." That was it. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't declaring undying love. I wasn't saying I couldn't live without him. I simply wanted to see him again in person, because we had been speaking so much over the phone, and sometimes proximity clarifies. You can talk to someone for hours on the phone and still not know how you actually feel around them physically. So I wanted to see him, observe, feel the energy again, see whether there was really something there worth exploring. And the moment I said it, he responded, "Aha, muti mue." That is Yoruba. And in that context, it was basically like, "I've got you now," as in the person who has been holding back has finally fallen. And I remember thinking, what do you mean? What do you mean you've got me? Because that was not how I was experiencing the moment. I had simply said I wanted to see him, but his response told me something about how he interpreted it. To him, he seemed to register a victory, like something had shifted, like he had finally secured something. Again, I said very little, but I noticed it. And then something happened almost immediately after. I believe it was the following day or very shortly afterwards. He told me his results were out and he needed to come back to the country where I lived to check them. But he didn't have the money to travel. Now, I listened carefully to the wording. He did not directly ask me for money. He didn't say, "Can you buy my ticket?" He didn't say, "Can you lend me the money?" He simply created the information. "My results are out. I need to come over. I would use the opportunity to see you, but I don't have the money right now." And then silence. To me, that silence felt engineered because I had just told him I wanted to see him. So now, suddenly, an opportunity had appeared for him to come. And the only thing standing between that opportunity and reality was money. My money, if I choose to volunteer it. And I remember thinking, so this is where I am supposed to say, "Don't worry, I'll pay for your ticket." I didn't. I said nothing. I didn't offer. I did not rescue the conversation. I allowed this silence to remain exactly where he placed it. Because I'm just getting to know you. Why would I be financing international travel for a man I barely know? A substantial amount of money, right? For you to travel across countries, to supposedly check examination results. And another thing crossed my mind. If these were academic results from an institution you had attended, why would you need to travel internationally simply to check them? Surely there would be an online portal, some form of communication, a way to obtain them remotely. So I did not understand the logic. But again, I didn't argue. I didn't say, "You are lying." I didn't accuse him of trying to manipulate me. I simply declined to participate. And this is something that is going to come up repeatedly in the story. People sometimes assume a boundary has to arrive with a speech. It doesn't. Sometimes your boundary is simply no, or even silence. You don't have to explain every no. You don't have to rescue every awkward pause someone creates in the hope that you will volunteer something. And I didn't. Then another conversation came. He said that the next time he came to the country where I lived, he would like to stay at my house. Again, no, absolutely not. And I told him why. I have young children, children who were watching me, children who were learning from the decisions I made. I was not going to bring a man I was still getting to know into my house and have him stay there. That was not happening. And I didn't care how charming he was. I didn't care how much we talked. I didn't care how serious he believed things might eventually become. There are lines I wasn't willing to blur. My home was not one of them. My children were another. And what I was beginning to notice was this. The relationship was still young, but the access being discussed was becoming very adult very quickly. My finances, my home, my space, my resources, my future, marriage. And at the time, I didn't yet know what to make of it, but my body was noticing. My spirit was noticing, even when my mind was still trying to remain fair. Then a few days after the conversation about him not having money to travel, we were on the phone again and he started telling me a story. He said, can you imagine these people in Africa? He told me that somebody he had not spoken to in decades had somehow gotten his number. And after all those years, the first thing this person apparently did was asking for money. I remember responding in an ordinary way you respond to something like that. Something like, wow, yes, these things happen. And the conversation continued. Then a few minutes later, he asked me something. He said, if I asked you as my wife to send money to someone in Africa, would you do it? My wife, but I'm not married to you. And I said, no. Immediately, no hesitation, no performance, no pretending. No, absolutely no. Because even in the hypothetical, the answer was clear to me. I wasn't going to become a financial extension of someone else's obligations because I was talking to them. If you want to support somebody, support them. But why am I automatically being positioned as the person who will fund whatever request you decide deserves funding? So I said no. And he laughed softly. Then he said, independent woman. I remember that. Independent woman. It was said almost playfully, but something about that phrase stayed with me because I wasn't trying to make a statement about independence. I wasn't waving a feminist flag at him. I had simply answered a question. Would you send money because your husband told you to? And mind you, I wasn't married to this person. It's even different if he was the husband. No, that was my answer. And his response told me that he had registered something, a boundary, a type of woman, a woman who would not automatically comply. And again, I took notes. Then came another conversation, and this one disturbed me in a different way. We were talking about his father. His mother had passed away, and his father was getting old. He spoke about wanting his father to marry again so that there would be somebody, taking care of him, someone to keep him company. That part made sense. Then he said something. He said he did not want his father to marry a divorcee with children. And I remember going quiet internally because I was a divorcee with children. The exact profile of woman he was describing as unsuitable for his father. And this same man was talking to me about marriage. So immediately, a contradiction opened up in my mind. You don't want your father to marry a divorced woman with children, but you want to marry a divorced woman with children? Why? Right? What exactly is different? But he wasn't finished. He said that if his father did marry such a woman, she needed to understand that there was nothing there for her to collect, nothing for her to take. And that sentence landed heavily because now I wasn't only hearing, I don't want my father to marry a divorcee. I was hearing, I am deeply alert to the possibility that a woman could marry a man for what she can access financially. That concern existed in him strongly. He understood that possibility perfectly. He could imagine a woman entering marriage with calculation. He could imagine somebody thinking about property, money, inheritance, what she might gain. He understood the concept very well. And yet, the woman he was pursuing was a divorced woman with children. The same category of woman he seemed suspicious of around his own father. And I remember thinking, this is very interesting. Again, I didn't confront him. I didn't say, do you hear yourself? I didn't ask him to explain the hypocrisy. I did what I had been doing from the beginning. I listened. Because at this point, I was beginning to realize something. Sometimes the most revealing thing you can do in a conversation is let the person finish, because people often tell you what they believe when they think they are talking about someone else. They tell you how they see money. They tell you how they see marriage. They tell you how they see women, how they see access, how they see vulnerability, how they see people who have something to lose. And when you don't interrupt them, they sometimes give you more than they intended. So now, look at what I had. A man who repeatedly spoke about schmex as something powerful enough to make a woman remain. A man who told me stories about women supposedly unable to let go of him. A man asking about my job, my benefits, my pension. A man who, after I said I wanted to see him, very quickly presented me with a travel problem that money could solve. A man who wanted to stay in my home. A man asking whether, as his wife, I would send money when he instructed me to. A man who seemed to interpret my refusal as evidence that I was an independent woman. And a man who was deeply suspicious of a divorced woman with children marrying his father because she might have something to gain, while simultaneously pursuing marriage with a divorced woman with children. Me. Now, individually, every one of those things could potentially be explained away. And that is what makes certain pattern difficult to identify at the beginning. One thing by itself looks harmless, then another thing happens, and another, and another. At some point, you stop asking, can I explain each individual thing? And you start asking, what happens when I put all of those things in the same room? That is where I was beginning to arrive. I still didn't have enough evidence to make some grand declaration about who this man was, and I didn't want to, but I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. And at the same time, the marriage conversations were accelerating. He wanted things to move quickly, and the faster he talked about marriage, the slower something inside me became. I wasn't excited. I wasn't feeling peace. I wasn't feeling, yes, this is where my life is supposed to go. I was feeling something else, something heavy, something I could not name. And eventually, that heaviness became dread. There was one particular evening when he started talking about marriage again, and while he was talking, something happened inside me. It was still difficult to explain. It felt as though my spirit went somewhere my body had not yet gone, into a future that had not happened. And somehow, I felt the consequences. I felt what it would be like to already be this man's wife, to be inside the marriage, to realize too late that my life had changed in ways I could not reverse, to understand that something was terribly wrong and have nowhere to go. It didn't feel like imagination. It didn't feel like ordinary nerves about marriage. It felt real. Absolutely real. So real that I started crying. And that's where I'm going to stop. Because part 1C is the moment the warning finally becomes impossible for me to ignore. The tears, the conversation, the fact that he thought that what I was feeling was probably connected to my previous marriage, and the fact that deep inside, I knew it wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. It was him. And before I ended that relationship, I said something to this man that I had never rehearsed, something that came out of my mouth before I fully understood why I was saying it. I said, you can never truly know a man until you marry him and have nowhere else to go. And then I walked away. At the time, I thought it was the end of the story. It wasn't. Because more than 3 years later, I was the one who said, hello.